Hey everybody, Chris here, and welcome to Thumbnail Thursday. This is a series of videos that I'm creating where I'll be sharing quick Photoshop tricks to help improve your thumbnail images for your YouTube videos. Today I'm going to share two methods for blurring the background of your thumbnail images. This helps really make your subject and any text that you add to your thumbnails really stand out, especially when they're shrunken down to that really small size on the YouTube home screen. Let's get started. The first method I'll share today is also the fastest. This is Photoshop's Neural Filter. To access it, make sure you have your image layer selected, and then go up to Filter and select Neural Filters. Then find the Depth Blur option. If you haven't used this Neural Filter before, you may need to download it before the toggle switch is available. To do that, just click the download icon, and then you're ready to go. Once you have this filter downloaded, just toggle this switch, and you'll see that Photoshop processes the image on the device. This takes just a few seconds, and then the result is immediately visible here in the preview window. As you can see, it did a really good job of isolating me against this background behind me, but I always find these default settings a little bit too strong. The blur strength is set to 50 as a default, and I find usually somewhere around 20 looks a little bit more natural as a background blur. Another thing you might notice is that this post is not very blurred. The neural filter here actually sees this post as being more or less on the same plane as I am, and therefore it left it in focus. Now, in this case, I think this could actually still work as a thumbnail image because this post is not too busy. It's not like a lot of small items, but it may be the case that you want this blurred as well, and that's where we start to see the limitations of the neural filter here. It generally does its masking job when it gets processed, and you cannot adjust this anymore. The only adjustments you can make are you can uncheck this focus subject box, and then you can click on something in the image, and it will choose that as the focal point. But even if I put it right on my eye, it still is going to see this wood post as being on the same plane. So I can't anywhere here say focus on me, but then ignore this post. They come together and you're sort of stuck with whatever Photoshop decides for you in this case. Aside from blur strength, you can also do some color correction here within this interface. But to be honest, I really never do any color correction here. I'm just here for the blur. Once you're happy with how your image looks, you're ready to leave the interface. I like to export this as a new layer because I always like to keep my original layer within my Photoshop document just in case I want to come back to it later. If I decide that the background blur that I added here is too much or too little, I always have the option to go back and redo this process. Once you've selected the output option you want, click OK, and you're all ready to go. Okay, now let's get on to method 2. Method 2 is especially helpful for situations where you need more control over selecting your subject. And this is something you might quickly notice if you run a lot of different images through the neural filter. I have a new image selected here that I'm going to run through the neural filter first to show you some limitations that we'll run into there. Again, I'm going to activate the depth blur and we'll let it process. As you can see here, it's confused the cameras on the shelf behind me as well as a little bit of the chair I'm sitting in as belonging to the subject of this photo, and so it didn't blur them. And these kind of problems come up quite frequently actually with the neural filter. I've seen it often with people wearing backpacks or wearing hats or holding objects. These are exactly the kind of cases where we need a second method that we can go to, one that gives us a little bit more control over selecting our subject and distinguishing it from the background. This, of course, involves a few more steps than the 2 clicks we need to get away with a neural filter, but I promise it's not too difficult. Let me show you. Again, let's make sure our image layer is selected here, and then let's go up to Select, Subject. Photoshop did an auto selection of the subject, and as you can see, it again made some of the same mistakes that it did in the neural filter. It kept this camera. Oddly, it didn't select this one, but it still made not a perfect selection. So we need to adjust our selection. To do this, we want to go into Quick Mask Mode, which we can do by either hitting Q on our keyboard or going over to this icon and clicking. You'll see that most of the image has gone red except for what has been selected by Photoshop. This helps us see what pixels are selected as a subject and what ones are excluded. We use the brush to exclude or add new pixels to this selection. So white will add pixels to the selection and black will take them away. I want to take away this camera, so I'm going to make sure that I'm selected on my brush and that the color here is set to black. I'm also going to zoom in because I want to be pretty precise here with my selection. You can use the bracket keys on your keyboard to quickly adjust the scale of your brush. Once you're happy with your selection, you can click the Quick Mask button or hit Q again to exit the Quick Mask mode. And now we can see we have our selection here on the layer. Next, I'm going to select my lasso tool because that will enable me to right-click on the subject here and choose Layer via Copy. What this just did is it copied all these selected pixels and made it into a new layer. So now you can see we have the subject only layer. Okay, at this step, you might be tempted to simply add a blur filter to the background image, but that doesn't tend to look very good because we get this ghosting effect around the edges of our subject because in the background layer, we still see the subject. So all those pixels, my blue shirt, skin tones, all of this ends up getting blurred out and doesn't end up looking like a natural background blur. So what I like to do to fix this is select this background image, then once again go up to Select, Subject, and again I'm going to deselect this camera, but I'm going to do a really rough job of it. I'm not as concerned this time that it looks perfect. I also see that my finger here isn't selected entirely, so I'm going to make sure that that's selected well, and then I'll leave the Quick Mask mode. Now go back up to Select and choose Modify and Expand. We want to expand our selection here by 10 or 15 pixels. You'll see that it adds this buffer around our selection. Now hold Shift and hit Delete. This brings up our fill options, and we want to make sure that the contents are set to Content Aware. Then click OK. You'll see that it removes me, but it makes quite a mess. Now, this Content Aware Fill feature is actually really great for fixing small areas or removing small objects. But here we've used it to fill in a really large percentage of our image, and as you can see, it didn't handle it very well. But for our purposes, this messy image is actually good enough. Let me show you why. First, I'm going to hit Command D real quick to remove the selection. Then I'm going to turn on my subject layer again. Now we're ready to add a blur to our background. Make sure the background layer is selected and go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. Now you can see that we get a nice blur on the background without getting any of that halo effect we did before. And the fact that our Content Aware Fill was not very well done doesn't really matter because most of it is hidden anyway. Now you can adjust this radius value to get the blur that you think feels right for your image. I definitely recommend something not too extreme. I think I usually find myself between 6 and 8 pixels. I think somewhere around there looks good. Once you're ready, just hit OK. And then you can do some fine tuning. I noticed, for example, that this selection down here still has a few rigid pixels. So in order to fix this, I'm going to select the subject layer and I'm going to zoom in. And then I'm going to use my eraser tool. And I'm going to make sure I have a brush with kind of a medium-high hardness set to it. Then I'm going to use the left bracket key to make this smaller. Then I'm just going to use this eraser to clean up these areas where the selection wasn't done well. And once you do these kind of little fine tunings, you're ready to go. Okay, that's it for the first Thumbnail Thursday. I hope you found it helpful. If you want to see more such videos in the coming weeks, please hit that subscribe button, and I hope to see you there. Cheers.